Life After the Rams is proudly sponsored by Seven Restaurant and Cafe Bar, located on Pride Park in Derby. Seven is the leading destination for all-day dining, artisan coffee and handcrafted cocktails, where the community comes together to relax, connect and celebrate.
Life After the Rams with Colin Gibson.
Hello and welcome back to Life After the Rams. This is episode 6. Today we're joined by Craig Short, a British record signing in 1992, a man whose Derby County journey spans the pitch, the dugout and the dressing room. But all of that pales into insignificance with the fight that he's been in for the past 15 years. Craig, for those of us who can remember back to 1992, yeah, we can. You're a club record, in fact, a British record, signing £2.5 million. We'll come on to that in a little while. And people will know you in Derby, certainly, in Blackburn, in Everton. But actually now you've probably got a wider profile for all the reasons that you wouldn't want to have a wider profile, because you are part of this Victors 11 group, effectively victims of financial abuse. The City of London police said you'd been victims of crime. To me, it sounds like you've been through a living hell. Just tell us about it.
It's hard, Colin, to sort of get it all into a short period, but we've only got a limited time when it's been 15 years of my life, this.
15 years?
Yeah. We've had the group set up for 10 years. I came back from Budapest in 2010. I'd retired playing by then. I'd worked out in Budapest for Sheffield United at Ferencváros. I just got divorced. I came back and realised that something wasn't quite right with my finances. I was getting huge tax bills. And met my second wife, who was a lawyer, and she sat with me. We went to a meeting in London, and it was a devastating meeting for me. They were asking me for an astronomical amount of money. I knew I'd never had that money. I knew there was a problem, there's something wrong. And I reached out to I knew one or two other lads were involved. And then I realised that there was like a tidal wave of people calling, ringing me, ringing ex-players. And then we just got a group together. And we decided to set up a group called the V11 in 2016. So it's 9 years all the group's been set. So we'd been looking at this for 4 or 5 years. Set the group up in 2016, got some former police detectives involved, Carly was so well connected with KC's financial experts, and I knew myself from the start that I was a victim of some sort of fraud. Forged signatures, etc. And the programme itself discusses all these, the forgeries. Got eminent KC on there saying this is the biggest fraud he's seen in his life, in his professional life. He's given his services up for free for 10 years, this chap. We've had other experts. And then we got it to the police. We went around around the country to get the police forces, and they probably shied away from it because it's so complex. City of London police took it on. And the group kept us going, really, because I know there are people out there suffering in silence. I've had a phone call tonight since with a former England cricketer. I want to say his name, suicidal, being affected by the same thing. It's affected jockeys, it's affected cricketers, it's affected golfers. But and the company's name was highlighted on the documentary. Now, since we started this movement, Colin, we've now realised that every walk of life's been affected by some sort of fraud. We're trying to champion the cause to change the law on investment fraud. And hopefully we'll do that. We're hoping to meet the PM. We've met the sports minister. So the documentary, we had great feedback on it. We were a bit worried about the negativity, about footballers, just sort of pissing the money up against the wall. It's nothing nothing like that. It's of entrusting friends, financial experts who became your friends, to invest your money to like anyone wants to do, to retire and have time. And it's my wife who's driven it. She's the brains. She's a lawyer. She's exceptionally talented. She's well connected, and she's realised she's driven it along with some other experts. And when you've got the City of London police commander who's now retired, said this should have gone to the CPS. And we're now registered victims of crime. We have been done for 7 years. but another organisation from the government is pursuing you for money you don't have and don't owe, we have no alternative but to fight. And hopefully we'll save lives, because I've seen some awful cases, and I've rushed to someone's house worried that an ex-player was in the process of committing suicide. I'm determined to get to the bottom of this. I'm determined to unravel it. And we've seen the post office scandal that all the years they've had to go through, still not getting justice. There's nothing else we can do but fight, really.
Just as an indication of how serious this is, you're at the training ground of the football club you're at, Christmas Eve, and the bailiffs turn up. Yeah,
demanding a huge amount of money off me, which, even if I hadn't got divorced, I wouldn't have had to pay back. It was laughable, really. I felt gutted, and I felt obviously that I was obviously very down in a way. But I thought the only way to get to the bottom of this is to investigate. And I've been fortunate. I've got a partner who's skilled enough and connected well enough to do that. And when I found out that this has gone far and wide with every sport, as I said, cricketers, jockeys, golfers, and now we're seeing every walk of life affected by fraud. That was a moment. That was probably my lowest moment of my life, because I was working. I was retired from playing. I was looking at just trying to establish myself as a coach, and to get that on Christmas Eve. And I think it was a tactic that has been used often by HMRC to try and reduce you to a mess, really. But fortunately, I've got good people around me, and I'm quite a strong person. And when I foresee an injustice, I'll fight it.
It's incomprehensible to think that could happen and that you come through it. And here we are in 2025, and you're still functioning, shall we say?
That's because I've got a young son. I've got a grandson. I've got people around me, who I love. I swore to my parents. My parents died on the same day, 18 months ago. They went through this journey with me, and they saw how hard I worked. I know a lot of people. My first year at Derby, Colin, I didn't cover myself in glory for the money they spent. That was quite an embarrassing year for me. But I like to think I worked hard at my career. And all I wanted to do was just provide for my family and save for the future. And I entrusted people to that. So. I'm fortunate. I've got so many good people around me, and I've got a good job. I'm very, very lucky. I've got a good job. These jobs are few and far between in football, and I'm determined to get justice for other people in a worse state than me. I've like I said, I've met people from every walk of life who've been absolutely shafted by investment fraud, and these people getting away with it, and it has to stop. We've seen injustices with the blood scandal, with the post office. Just to say there's two there. And it's taken ages for them to get justice. I know it's taken us a long time. We've been at it for 15 years, 10 years with the group. We've really overcome a lot of hurdles in this, and we've stuck together. And it wouldn't have been possible without us being together. And since the doc went out, it's incredible the amount of phone calls I've had. I get an unknown, I don't know the number, an unknown number every day ringing me, such and such, and I'm thinking, wow, this is really it's just scratching the surface. And I want to get it sorted out. I want to get on with my life, and I'm 57 now. I seem to be doing this since I finished playing, and so it's something that's ongoing.
It almost seems trite to try and take the conversation on to football and years ago, but that's why we're talking realistically. We'll come to the signing for Derby in a moment. Notts County is really where you started to make your name, and I kept hearing these whispers, Derby are going to rebuild Meadow Lane actually by signing this young lad called Craig Short, and they'd already signed another young lad called Tommy Johnson, and between you, there was quite a sizable chunk to rebuild Notts County. I'm being slightly facetious there. You had a great time at Notts, didn't you?
I was very lucky. I met Neil Warnock at Scarborough. Neil had success there, went to Notts County that summer of '89. I'd just come out of non-league football, Colin. I'd been playing midfield or right wing. I had a couple of 18 months playing centre-back. I didn't want to head a ball when I was at school. It was just bizarre how it just all fell into place. Neil moved on, rang me, said, I want to sign you. Leighton Orient were in from me as well. I went down to London and as a northern country bumpkin thought, oh my God, London. So I chose Notts County. I was fortunate choosing a team that was full of really good players, like Tommy, you mentioned his name, Mark Draper, Dean Yates, along with a lot of good experienced professionals. And struggled a little bit at first because it was just my first move. You know, I seemed to struggle every time I moved clubs. Then got into we had a good side and ended up at Wembley, and I scored at Wembley in my first season there. So it all seemed to just happen for 2 or 3 years with Neil. 2 promotions, 3 years of success, a little club, getting to the old first division, getting relegated, but you know it was probably something that we were favourites to be relegated after going so far so quickly. But a hell of a journey, a hell of an experience, and very exciting. So I'd put it all down to Neil and thank Neil for that.
When did you start to get the inkling that Derby wanted you? Because, I mean, you mentioned Mark Draper there, and I think it's fair to say Arthur Cox had a good go to try and sign Mark Draper, but it never quite happened.
Yeah, there was Drapes and Tommy doing well. It was more or less around that time of that last season. I remember there was rumours of Kenny watching me and Souness even watching me, and it was all a little bit pie in the sky stuff for me. I was thinking, God, I've only been playing village football 3 years ago. Now these clubs looking at me. Didn't have a lot of confidence in my own ability. I had a bit of imposter syndrome, which probably affected me a little bit when I first came to Derby. And then the rumours were when we got relegated that Neil was maybe leaving. He nearly went to Chelsea at one point. Tommy had gone, and I thought, God, I've got to maybe jump at the chance here. I can't turn this down. I always thought my current contract was going to be my last contract. You know, because I didn't do YTS, Colin. I did a building site. I did NatWest Bank, and then I'm playing football. I'm thinking someone's going to.
So you had a real job.
I had a real job, yeah. So someone's going to find me out soon enough that I'm not good enough to play, and I couldn't turn down the opportunity. Obviously, Blackburn and Derby came from me at the same time, and it became an auction. I never, the value should never have gone to what it did. The price should never have gone to what it did but they just Derek Pavis drove that price, and it got to ridiculous levels. I got married that summer. I was on honeymoon. I thought, oh God, I've been on the beach, and my price has gone up $1 million, which nowadays is peanuts, isn't it? Nowadays, but at the time it was a bit. I just wanted to move. Nothing against Notts County. I saw the chance to move, and the price probably did affect me my first year at Derby, but. I've never regretted anything I've done really in football. I've just enjoyed the ride, and it went on for a while.
He was a wily character, Derek Pavis, but was the choice yours in the end, Derby or Blackburn?
It was mine, yeah, and it's probably down to my lack of confidence. My mates had gone to Derby. Tommy had gone. I lived down the other end of the A52. I used to go walking in the Derbyshire Dales near Ashbourne with my dog, which I ended up nearly living. So. Probably lack of confidence. I went to Blackburn, had talks with Kenny, and Shearer was there that day. He'd signed for $3.5 million. He's a record signing for any player. And I just got a little bit overawed. I thought I took the easy option in a way. I got letters from Blackburn fans every year. One in particular, they finished third the first year. He said, "You could have finished third in the Premier League." Then this next year they won it. He said, "You could have been." But as well, Colin, you watched me play that first year. I probably would have disappeared without a trace if I'd been like that at Blackburn. Arthur was very patient with me. And Roy Mack, when Roy took the job on, I then started to improve and show some form. And I was just pleased in the end that after my disastrous first year, where I was awful and I could have been dropped so many times, that I managed to just show the Derby fans that I could play and I could perform at that level. But the unfortunate thing was we never got promotion, and our chance at Wembley, we're 1-0 up and losing 2-1. That was the lowest point of my playing career, not going up with Derby, and then I moved on later on.
It's refreshingly different to hear a player so self-deprecating and really putting themselves down.
I think I've spoken to a lot of people, and I love the psychology of sport, Colin. I met Tim Foster, who was in Pinsent's boat for the Olympics, and talking about their fear of failure. I've read McEnroe's book. I've read Pinsent's book himself. And I've sat in a dressing room at Blackburn, which is probably the best dressing room I've ever been in, with people like Brad Friedel and Andy Cole and Two-Guy, great players. Lucas Neal, Australian captain, Henning Berg, ex-Manu. Played with those players and realised as I was getting older, even though I became more confident, that everyone has that fear of failure. Most people do. And listening to Tim Foster and reading Pinsent's book, Pinsent said, I think in his book, at the morning of the event for the the Olympics, he hoped the minibus would crash and they'd all get slightly injured and not have to take part. That's how much the nerves consumed them. Obviously, they went and won the gold medals. But I think and I've asked this question of many players since I've been coaching. I've asked it at Oxford a couple of years ago when we had a guy in doing psychology, and I said, who in here plays with fear? We had a lad put his hand up who's from Chelsea. He was the first one to put his hand up. And I thought, well, you're one of the most talented players here. You're fearing failure. And I did all my career, and probably what spurred me on, drove me to be better and get better. I never stopped practicing. I always thought I was the underdog. So Neil probably instilled that a little bit in me because I hadn't done the apprenticeship. So I don't think it's just, I'm not just one off. I think there are a lot of people out there in sport, in any walk of life. You walk into any job thinking, am I good enough to do this? Am I capable? What do people think of me? And when you go into a dressing room, all you want to do is prove to that dressing room. It's not as much to the fans or the manager or anyone else. It's to the dressing room first. You want to prove if you're good enough. And a number of times I walked in on a Monday morning after making a mistake on a Saturday, thinking I've let these lads down. It's a hard place to go. So that was my driving force, and that was, I sympathise sometimes with people when you lack confidence going onto a football, any sporting arena, or anything in life. It's a struggle. It's a fight. And Stephen Reid, who's an ex-teammate of mine at Blackburn, he does counselling now for it. I didn't know at the time, but Stephen used to have this huge fear of playing on a Saturday, and sometimes couldn't even make it to his car from his house. Now, I'd watch Stephen every day in training and play with him, thinking, this lad's got everything. He's the most capable player I've played with. But yet inside, he had these demons, and it's, you can cover it up, can't you? You can hide it. So I masked a little bit of it, but because I'm meant to be a big, tough centre-half. But no, I had feelings as well.
Well, he was signed by Arthur Cox in the summer of '92 after Derby had lost to Blackburn in the playoffs that summer. Right. Arthur then goes, and Roy McFarlane took over. And eventually the team did settle, and you made the playoffs and made the playoff final in '94. Again, you weren't the front runners. In fact, the team that you beat in the semi-finals finished way ahead of you in the table, but time it just right. And those two games against Millwall, nobody ever forgets the second leg, particularly those at Radio Derby with the slightly dented car, shall we say. Yeah. But I mean, over two games, we probably saw the best of what that team could actually produce. Yeah,
and I thought going into that semi-final, that would be our toughest test. I thought if we can get past Millwall, I thought we got a real chance. I thought Millwall was always going to be our biggest test, like you said. Then they finished way ahead of us. I can't remember who their manager was at the time, but they were playing some good football. They
Mick McCarthy, I think, wasn't it?
Mick McCarthy, that's right. I think it was Mick. Yeah, the night at the Den. Yeah, it was I'll never forget that night. But always felt as though we were going to go through. I think Tommy scored. Did he score one or two? Yeah, so
Gary Deaney scored.
And we seemed to click. And I think, Arthur tried to sign all the best young talent in the country, or some of the best young talent in the country. We probably needed a bit more experience. And then when Roy came along, we probably got used to justifying our price tags. And we seemed to get into a bit of a rhythm and have a bit more confidence and swagger about ourselves. And we were, on our day, a very, very good team to watch and play in.
There's a lovely story after the first leg, and you won it 2-0, 2-1 at the baseball ground. And I think it was Paul Williams' 21st birthday. So Roy decided, right, okay, everybody have a glass of champagne to celebrate Paul Williams' 21st birthday. Mick McCarthy took it as you were celebrating that, we've done it in the first leg. And he tried to use that as the psychology to say, look at this bunch of big-time Charlies already celebrating. Well, it certainly backfired.
Yeah, we were excellent in the second leg, weren't we? We really were. I never felt as though we were going to lose that then. I really felt very confident of it, despite the pitch invasions and the trouble we had. It was a huge relief to get to Wembley. I think as a player and playing at Wembley before, all I wanted to do was get to Wembley. I just loved playing at Wembley. I was lucky to do it with Notts County. And all respect to Leicester, I thought we'd be better than them when we went 1-0 up, and then John Harkes missed a good chance. But they stuck at it. It was a devastating day. That really was a devastating day.
I've got two or three vivid images. One is Tommy going through and scoring. Fabulous little left foot pass by Simo, put Tommy away. Tommy had missed a chance earlier on, but we won't hold that against him. No. And he puts Derby ahead. What about the Leicester equaliser? That's one of the strangest goals I think I've ever seen.
Yeah, Well, I think what I got my form back when I started playing with Paul Williams, Jossie. And Jossie was a midfielder, wasn't he? And came into centre back. We still speak now, me and Joss. A really, really good centre back, and seemed to click with Joss. Enjoyed playing with him. Now I know the cross came in. I went up for a header with Walsh, and Martin came out for it, and it seemed to be. I thought Martin was going to punch or clear. Next thing I looked down, it's bouncing towards our goal. I think Jossie just takes his eyes off the ball on the touch on the goal line, because it just seemed to be slow motion, and that gave them that the equaliser. That was the equaliser then, wasn't it? Just before half time.
Yeah.
So we knew we had a bit to do. When they picked their front three, there was Walsh, Ormonroyd, and Roberts. I was delighted. Joachim wasn't on the starting lineup just because of his pace, and then I felt even more confident. But Martin had a plan, and they scored from the winner was from a cross, wasn't it? From Ormonroyd got across me. Martin made a great save. So they probably just saw a little bit of their size would outdo us in important areas, which happened on the day.
I don't think I've ever seen such devastation on a football field. Even when Derby lost in 2013-14 with the Bobby Zamora last gasp goal, but when that final whistle went against Leicester, you just thought maybe that was the chance, and this isn't coming around again.
Yeah, it was a long evening. I remember sinking to my knees on the Wembley pitch, and unfortunately I'd won 2 games there with Notts County, so I was then experiencing the lows of Wembley in a Wembley playoff final. It's been built up now as the most expensive playoff final, hasn't it, in world football? So, and I was in tears, and I remember Gavin Ward. I'll never forget Gavin Ward. Their goalkeeper came up to me and gave me a hug and said, the first thing he did, he wanted to celebrate with his mates, and I still see Gavin now. He's a goalkeeping coach. But yeah, I can remember that evening. We were quite confident, not overconfident that we'd do it. Small margins, Harksy's chance. Jossie, me not winning the header possibly, with Martin come out for it. Jossie not taking him. Those little things, and devastating for the Derby fans because it was the Wembley was full. I think an incredible experience playing in front of a full Wembley. But and then that started to see the end of everyone moving on, really. Players moving out of the club. Yeah.
Roy's last year in charge as manager. Tommy Johnson went part way through. Paul Kitson went quite early. And you just felt this is the end, isn't it?
Yeah, he did. It was a team that Arthur tried to build and try and get success with the backing of Lionel, of course. Lionel was a lovely man. And from the fee they paid for me, I always felt as though I'd let Arthur down a little bit. Could have done more for Lionel. Roy helped me a great deal when he first took over. He really did. Obviously, he was a great centre back, and he really got the best out of me. And I hopefully proved that I was maybe not worth the money, but I did do a decent job in the end because I got Player of the Year. I think it was my second year I got Player of the Year and got the PFA team. But I wish I just got stuck in really earlier on and produced better form for the first season I got there, really.
There's a certain irony that at the end of the season, you leave and several other players leave. Roy goes and Derby have this massive change and in comes Jim Smith. And within a year, Derby are in the Premier League. You said you've never regretted anything in football, and I guess with the way things were, you were never going to stay anyway because Derby needed to get money in and you were a saleable commodity. But did you ever think, God, if I'd have had one more year, I'd have actually got into the Premier League with this team?
Yeah, I get to a place where I get happy in an area I live. I loved where I lived. I lived in Longford near Ashbourne, so I was very happy. I just had started a family. When Everton came in for me, it was a big shock for me because I just didn't think I would go back into the Prem. I didn't think my time was over with Notts County and Derby not getting promoted. So we played Everton that year in the March for the third round of the Cup. And I just seemed to do okay against Big Dunk. They went on to win it that year, of course, in '95. And Joe Royal then got in touch with my agent, and all of a sudden it started. And I thought, well, geez, Everton. And then again, the old imposter syndrome. I can't be going to Everton. They just won the FA Cup. They've got Dave Watson. They've got Dave Unsworth, and Joe Royal's a manager. They've got Duncan Ferguson. But then I was a Liverpool fan as well, of course. So that. But all of a sudden I'm thinking I'm going to Merseyside, and I couldn't turn that down. I just could not turn that down. I got my form back. I thought, I have to give myself. I turned it down last time with Kenny and Blackburn. So I couldn't turn it down, and I signed the same day as Kanchelskis. Well, the last time I heard about Kanchelskis' name, Colin, was when Notts County got promoted from the old second division to the first division. Our first game was Man U away. So we are, Notts County, two promotions, Old Trafford, turn up at 1:30, thinking it's packed already. All these lads from non-league and old-timers who Neil brought in. And I remember Neil used to do a man-for-man system. So he said, Shorty, you mark Mark Hughes. Yatesy, you mark Brian McClare. And then he went and he shouted to Mick Jones, and Mick was at Derby with Roy Mack, years ago. He said, Mick. Mick was his assistant. He said, Mick, who's this Kanchelskis lad? And that was Andre's first game for Man U against Notts County. And Alan Paris had to do a man marking job on Kanchelskis. We found out exactly who Kanchelskis was that day. 3 years later, he signed the same day for me at Goodison. He went for 6 million. I was like 2 million. So it was so strange and weird, but surreal. I was playing against him at Old Trafford. Now he was signed the same day as me, and he was a big star, of course, in those days. So I was just like a little bit of a supporting act that day, and I preferred it that way, Colin.
I'm sure you did. There's a slight irony as well that a young lad came from Everton to Derby as sort of the mate weight in the deal, and you work with him now at Oxford, Gary Rowett.
He often says that. Gary is a good player in his own right. He's younger than me at the time. I think he was about 19 when he moved. He wasn't getting many opportunities at Everton. We talk about it a lot, actually. And he was very successful, came into the gym side. You bought Igor Stimac, who was an absolute wonderful player. The Croatian, you had a little bit of fairy dust, didn't you, there? You really looked a really good side, played three at the back. You had a little bit of steel, but you also had that flair as well. And I was delighted when they got promotion. I really was delighted. And then moving into Pride Park after that. I left on good terms with Jim, and I still had good mates there. Simo was still there, and I wanted them to do well. And I think they even turned up at Goodison maybe a couple of years later and beat us 1-0. So, with Lee Carsley, my old boot boy, was there as well, of course.
Who's not gone on to do too bad a job?
Do very well, yeah. But yeah, me and Gary have had links all throughout that, and he's worked at Derby when I was at the academy, and then we were on our pro license together. So, it's been nice having Gary as a manager.
You moved around. You had a long association with Blackburn, went back to Blackburn eventually coaching with Gary Bowyer along the way, who's obviously now just down the road at Burton. You seem to have these links with, as you say, people associated with Derby or the Derby area.
Yeah, I think Blackburn was my most successful time as a player, and I played for my boyhood hero was Graham Souness. I couldn't believe it when he walked in. When we had my most successful time as a player with the team I played in, I got the opportunity to go back there because of Gary. Gary came from Derby to Blackburn in about 2004 to do the 18s. So he was at a separate, at Derby and the first team all together, the academy and the first team together. At Blackburn, it was different sites, very close to each other, different sites. But Gary came in. I knew of Gary from our Nottingham days, and there was a nightclub called the Black Orchid. I used to meet him in there sometimes, but didn't really know him that well. I was working for doing the under-16s at Derby for Nigel. Nigel Clough kindly gave me a job, and working for my old mate Darren. So I really enjoyed player development. I really do enjoy that, especially 16s up to 23s. But I was living in Harrogate and commuting every day to Derby, so it was a 4-hour round trip, so it was hard. So when Gary got in touch and said, he just rang me out of the blue, and there was an old physio there called Dave Fever, who was my physio when I was a player, and I think David sort of recommended me to go and help out an old player. 6 years at that club, knew it well. It was a terrific club, it really was, on back of what Jack had built, Jack Walker. So I thought, I'm living in Harrogate, it's a 50-minute drive to the train ground. I can't do 4 hours a day all the time. When Gary came in for me, he said, "Do you want to come and work for me?" I said, "What do you want me to come and do?" He went, "Well, what do you want to do?" I went, "Well, come and be your coach, of course." He'd already had an assistant manager in, so I went to be his first team coach, and I loved it. I loved it going back there. First team football. I had 2.5 years there, living close. And a lot of people still there from my playing days. So all good things come to an end, of course, but it was a super, super club, and just nice to go back to somewhere you played for 6 years.
Ferencváros, how did that come about?
Going and training with the owner, the Sheffield United owner, called Kevin McCabe. His son Simon lived in Harrogate. We used to go out running together. Now, Kevin was a Scarborough man. Simon had grown up in the Scarborough area. We sort of had links, and we used to go train together. I was living on my own in Harrogate. We trained together. My last club was Sheffield United. They bought Ferencváros. They bought one or two clubs around the world, and they just said, I'd had my sailing school. I was working. I set my own sailing school up in the Lake District to get away from football for a little while. Loved it, but it wasn't ever going to pay the bills. I hadn't got any football qualifications, just done my sailing qualifications, so it was obviously no good to me for coaching. Done some sailing qualifications, and I thought, I've got to get back into it. Didn't need a qualification to go over there. Bobby Davison, he was out there as manager, an ex-Derby player. So I flew over there to have a look in Budapest, wonderful city, their biggest club in Hungary. And what a lovely guy Bobby was. I never met him before, and helped me settle in, helped me with my coaching, got me on my coaching feet, gave me loads of little ideas, looked after me because I was on my own. And I think we were good for each other in a way, because I know Bobby was out there on his own. His wife would come out and visit him every now and then. But that was a huge experience, a scary experience at times. I thought I'd probably end up going for 2 months. I ended up being there for 2 years. Rewarding. I wouldn't be in football now if I hadn't gone over there, Colin. I thanked Sheffield United for giving me that chance. Managed to get my coaching certificates while I was out there. The examiner had to fly out to Budapest to examine me. So I took him for a wild night out the night before. He stayed at my apartment. So I thought there's any danger in him not passing me. So he had to pass my B licence out there. I flew back once a month to do my A licence and got that by the time I come back. So it was a wonderful 2 years in lots of ways. I missed my girls, of course. My girls were back in England, so that was tough. But it's something I had to do to get on the ladder, because football jobs are so few and far between. There's a lot of better people than me out of the game, so I couldn't turn it down, really.
This is Life After the Rams. I'm Colin Gibson in conversation with Craig Short. Life After the Rams is proudly sponsored by Seven Restaurant and Cafe Bar, located on Derby's Pride Park. Seven is the leading destination for all-day dining, artisan coffee and handcrafted cocktails. With a focus on quality, seasonal ingredients and a welcoming atmosphere, Seven is where the community comes together to relax, connect and celebrate.
Life After the Rams with Colin Gibson.
You've mentioned sailing. I suppose, yeah, you're from Bridlington originally, so it's on the coast. Where did this love of sailing come from?
My mum used to sail out of Whitby when I was a kid, and I went with her a couple of times, and it was actually bloody scary. No, I used to think, I don't fancy this. Mum had a love of sailing. She went and did the tall ships race from Gran Canaria to the Azores. But I lived in Southport. I got into it, and I started to read sailing magazines and stories of people sail around the world or raced across the oceans and stuff like that. So I just had this love of it. There was a sailing lake nearby. I got a little wayfarer. I taught myself to sail. Well, I got someone to teach me to sail. Sorry. And then when I was playing at Blackburn, I was living in Harrogate. But I love the Lake District. I love going up in there. I've lived up there. I love walking up there. And I just thought, do you know what? I'm going to treat myself. Towards the end of my career, I thought I'm going to treat myself to a little boat. Walked into a yacht brokers and said, I want to buy a sailboat. And they said, and I thought they were going to laugh at me. And I said, okay, well, no idea really how to sail a bigger boat. How to sail dinghies. And just beautiful backdrop, wonderful location to sail, safe. Got into it. And then I met a retired anaesthetist called Bob Wheatley. Bob was from York, retired. And funnily enough, when I got sat talking to him in a little bar one day, we'd met each other, and he'd lived in York, and he sort of recognised me, knew I had a boat on the lake. He said, I've put your mum to sleep. I've anaesthetised your mum years and years before. So there's a bit of a link. And he said, what are you going to do when you finish playing? And I said, I'm just going to have a break from the game. I said, and he said, well, do you want to come and work with me, and we'll set up a little sailing school together. He already had an RYA instructing courses running from his own boat. His boat was called Painkiller, with him being an anaesthetist.
Very good.
Yeah, so we've had 2 boats, and we set up this company, and we did a lot. Then we ended up doing a lot of corporate stuff, a lot of racing. So what we teach in 2 days on RYA instructing courses, we'd cram into a morning. Companies would come along. We'd get 6 or 7 or probably 8 boats sometimes from the lake, because owners had their boats for weekends. They'd leave them tied up on the lake during the week. We'd take them off the buoys. We had good skippers, loads of good sailors up there. Put the skippers on the boats and have like a corporate race day. So it was like the America's Cup thing, on a smaller version on the Lake Windermere, and it was terrific. And we sold rooms to hotels, and I loved it, and I learned a lot. And then I got chances to go and sail overseas. I went and did the Atlantic in 2007. And then I had little chartered places. I went to the Caribbean and chartered a boat there and Greek islands, but the Atlantic was always was an ambition of mine to go and do that, and luckily I got the chance to do it.
Tell us about that.
I was sat in a pub in Pickering, my hometown, with a pint in my hand, and I had one or two, and I looked through the magazine, and I saw this race across the Atlantic, and I thought, okay, and I rang this number. It was 10:30 at night. I always remember it. And the Dutch guy answered. And he realised I was a little bit two sheets to the wind, which is a sailing term. So pardon the pun. And he said, ring me back in the morning when you're sober. I rang him the next morning. I was on the boat within 3 days, and there was 225 yachts raced out of Gran Canaria across to St. Lucia. A couple of days after that. So it was a hell of an experience. It took us 18 days. Just met some wonderful people and learnt lots. I helmed for nearly 1,000 miles. We had no engine, no autopilot, and we got hit by a tropical storm called Olga. I had a wonderful time, and I would love to do it again.
So no real time to think about it, prepare for it. It was literally after sobering up, phone call, and you were virtually out there and you're on your way.
I was in Gran Canaria within 3 days of that phone call, Colin. Yeah, and then the first thing the skipper said to me, how much sailing have you done? I said, well, I've only sailed on the lake. He said, well, you're the third most experienced person on this boat. I think, oh, no, this doesn't sound good. He said, you're a watch leader. But we had a young student on there who had just wanted to have an experience. And then another girl, she was an oceanographer. So the two main people in charge were the skipper and his girlfriend, who were excellent sailors. And I just helped out with the helming and cooking and cleaning and changing sails. But it was 18 days, and it was lovely because it was the Atlantic in November, but it was from Gran Canaria to St. Lucia, so it was in lovely weather. We had 1, 2 or 3 bad days, but apart from that, caught a marlin bigger than me, which people pay for, and that fed us for 4 days. We saw minke whales, we had flying fish hit us in the middle of the night, we had storms, we had damage. It was scary at times, but it was something I would love to try again.
Try it again.
Yeah, I like to come back the other way. I like to go west to east instead of. I turned the boat round in the middle of the night. And I was heading towards Africa, and I didn't even realise I turned it round. But the skipper was asleep down below, and he just looked at me and said, "Craig, you're taking us back to Africa. We're trying to get to the West Indies or to the Caribbean." So I learned so much. I met some really good people I still keep in touch with now. Yeah, I tell you what, if you want to go on a diet, go on a sailing trip like that. I lost about a stone and a half because you just don't sleep and you just don't eat much.
It sounds like an incredible experience.
It was, yeah. It was something, yeah. It's like the Redgrave one when he comes out of the boat after his 5th goal and don't ever let me get in the boat again. I was a bit like that at the end, but now I'd love to go back, and I wish I had the time to do it. And I'd try and teach my little son to sail, and I'd go back to it. Probably a little, but not maybe something a little bit in the sunshine of the Greek islands or something like that, where my mum used to go a lot, and we used to go there with my mum. She loved it, So it's a great pastime, but it's obviously time consuming, and it can be expensive as well, of course.
Let's sort of almost come full circle and talk Derby again. You worked at the academy with Darren Wassell for quite a while, and in 2016, the manager changes. Well, there's a surprise at Derby, but Paul Clement is let go, even though he was going to be the next Sir Alex Ferguson, but that's another story altogether. And the then owner, and presumably the chief exec, said to Darren Wassell, right, will you take it through to the end of the season? So Wass said yes, and you were part of that team, and you got to the playoffs, and lost to Hull, but it was quite a journey along the way in a fairly short period of time. It was February. In fact, I'll tell you when it was. It was February the 8th, 2016, because it was 2 days after my 60th birthday. I'd gone away to Spain for a couple of days, and typical Derby sacked the manager while I'm on holiday.
Yeah, I'd only been in the building about 10 days, I think, doing the 23s with Pat and Darren. I was fortunate to get my job back after losing my job at Blackburn, of course. And Darren rang me and said, do you want to come back? So, I think then I'd have to fill the first team football because, I'd had 2.5 years and getting the sack. So you're thinking this is more stable. I love play. As I said before, I love youth development. And what a good academy to come back to, Category 1, working with my old mate again. I'd driven back to Harrogate that day. I got a phone call from Darren when I got back into Harrogate, and he went, and I answered, he went, you've not heard, have you? I went, heard what? He went, the manager's been sacked. I said, you're joking, aren't you? I said, because he just rang me about Marcus Olsen at Paul when I first went in the building. And he rang me just out of the blue, said, because I worked with Marcus at Blackburn. And he said, I've been offered to take the job till the end of the season. Do you want to come and help out? I said, because you've got the knowledge of the Championship, because I had 2.5 years with Blackburn. Oh, I can't turn it down, And it was jumping back into the fire again, of course. But what a squad they had, what position we were in, working with my roommate and a lad who I've got so much time for in Darren, a man who's got high principles. I think a lot. I'm looking back now. Darren could easily got into management and been a football manager. He had a bit. He worked with Brian Clough. He had standards he'd set. He wouldn't. Sometimes it's refreshing to see those standards. He knew what he wanted from people and how to treat people as well. He was a good motivator. I thought he did very, very well, considering he didn't have much power, because the players would know that was a demanding dressing room. That was some big hitters in that dressing room. Paul lost his job? That's open to debate. When they're fourth, I like to think we kept it going. Beating Hull at 4-0 in the league game was something, but then it's never going to be two games the same, is it? Steve Bruce is going to know exactly what to do in the playoffs. And going 3-0 down after the first leg was devastating, but we had a real go up at Hull. But I enjoyed it. It was really good. I see George Thorne now. He was working at Oxford for a little while. Was George? It was a good experience. I was working at a club that gave me so many opportunities as a player and as a coach many times around. So why not be a first team coach? Yes, could you do things better? Of course you could. Are there small margins? Could you looked at should we have got up? Possibly, yeah. I know Mel was desperate to get up and invested so much money in the club and the squad and the infrastructure, of course. But I enjoyed it with Darren, and I thought he held his head up high, and he had a lot of respect from people around the club, the way he treated people and the way he went about things. So he's a decent human being.
Those two legs against Hull City, as you say, 3-0, and the third goal was late on at Pride Park, and you think, that's that then. And I was working at the club at the time, and the media team, we went into the bistro area on the day of the whole game, and there just seemed to be no atmosphere. So we thought, right, okay, we'll go over to Hull. Let's see what happens. But, I don't think we're going to hold out too much hope here. And suddenly, they go out there, and Derby are unplayable. I remember Steve Bruce. I was working at pitch side, and Steve Bruce is trying everything he can to stop Derby playing, and whatever he tried just didn't work because you were unplayable for that first 45.
Yeah, the killer was, Colin, was like you mentioned earlier, was the goal against us, the third goal when we had a corner and they broke and scored us to make it 3-0, and that was a devastating scoreline then to take back up to Hull. And I thought, well, God, we could get turned over 4 or 5. This could be 5-6-0 on aggregate, But Darren spoke really well before the game. I always remember his speech. Really spoke really well. Took the pressure off the lads. And they're a talented squad, as you know. So when we went and 2-0 up, I thought, God, they're going to be on the ropes now. But looking back, and I know Curtis Davis ended up playing. He was playing that night with Michael Dawson, wasn't he? Looking back, how well those two centre-backs did for Hull, because you'd think after going 2-0 up, we'd be creating loads of chances. We didn't create a great deal. I know Bryce had a chance. It come off his calf, I think. But we never really created anything clear-cut. We had a lot of pressure, but they contained us, and they seemed to do well because obviously they were under a lot of pressure with the 2-0. You think, oh, God, we turned this round. But the lads had a real go, and it was devastating not to get through, because you thought, once we'd gone 2-0 up in that first half, I thought, we're going to win it quite comfortably the way the lads were. But wasn't to be. But I was thankful of the opportunity of what Mel gave us when we'd only been in the building for like 10 days, and all of a sudden the first team dressing room. Oh, wow, just get on with it.
So when you look back, and with all that's going off in your life at the moment, how do you reflect on Derby as a young player coming in with that price tag on, with the playoff final against Leicester, and it didn't quite get over the line, but you got to play in the Premier League, and then after all the playing career, eventually you come back and have further experiences with Derby. That, I guess, in a way, they've been a large part of your football career.
A huge part. And my coaching came back from Budapest and got a job at Notts County briefly for 5 months as the manager. I lost the job there. We were just 4 points outside the playoffs, and I was gutted really to lose the job. But then I went and played in a veterans game at Pride Park and met Nigel. Nigel sat with me, and that's when I got the call. Wasp rang me out of the blue and said, "Nigel wants you to come down and work down here." So I was really grateful for a good man in Nigel Clough, working for Darren as well. Probably for 2 years in Budapest and then 5 months at Notts County, still not learned the trade. It doesn't matter how long you've played for, Colin. I went to an auditorium in the FA years ago, and it said, Dick Bate, who gave the speech, said, "You said 10 years of education being a coach." And I'm thinking, I've just played the game for 20 years. I should know everything. You don't. I had to learn. I was 2 or 3 years into it, and I learned so much. I've learned so much. People say about ex-players make great coaches and managers. Well, we're seeing now that it's people who haven't played the game are making really good coaches and managers. And that's because they've applied themselves from an early age and done the pro licenses and watched so much football that they're just as good as the ex-players. And a lot of ex-players have a go at me for that. Yes, we can take things into the dressing room, what we've had, our emotion, and how to cope with imposter syndrome, all those sort of things. But there's some of these coaches now coming through, and the coach education is excellent. I had to learn all that. I learned it off people like Nigel, like Gary Boyer, all my old managers, Walter Smith, Graham Souness, Neil Moore, all these little things you take from people. I'm so lucky, whatever I've got on in my personal life, I've been so lucky keeping a job in football. And I like to think I get on with people. I can relate to things. I'm not the best coach in the world, because, I admit that. But I can pass on certain experiences. It's a game of an opinion, isn't it? We've all got different opinions of how we see the game. So I've been so lucky. Derby, a big part of that. 2 jobs in youth development, which I love and I would always go back to. And then playing for 3 years. And bearing with me for that first year, giving me the time and the patience. The Derby fans, I go back now, and I think when you go back to former clubs, Colin, I go back to Everton, and the fans are brilliant with you, an ex-player. When you're a player, you can be open target because you've had bad games, of course. So I've been so fortunate in my career. At times when I got that bankruptcy petition on Christmas Eve, I probably at the time wishing I'd never become a professional footballer. That's how low I felt. But life races by, doesn't it? I'm 57. Where does it go that time? But I've been looking back. I've got wonderful memories. I've had great friendships, great experiences, some bad ones as well. But I think it makes the person you are. And I'll work as long as I can because I do love the game.
Craig, it's been fascinating to talk to you. And I think I speak for everybody who supports Derby and who saw you play, or maybe those that didn't see you play, but you have all those connections with Derby that clearly we wish you all the best going forward with the fight that you've got.
Thanks, Colin. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I really enjoyed going down memory lane. And hopefully, I'll see you soon, Colin, no doubt. But thank you for inviting me on.
A truly remarkable story. Now, our next episode will be our Christmas special, a 2-parter with a legend that is Roy McFarland. Part 1 will be out on December the 18th, the second part on Boxing Day, just in time for that trip to St Andrews to cheer on the Rams, so look out for those. If you've missed our conversations so far in the series with Phil G, Eric Steele, Roger Davis, Sean Barker or Craig Bryson, they're still available from wherever you get your podcasts from. Thanks to Rams Trust and 7 Restaurant and Cafe Bar in Derby for supporting us. Rams Trust is the Derby County Supporters Society established to promote good governance and fan engagement. They welcome new membership applications from all supporters. Just visit ramstrust.org.uk/membership for further details. 7 is the leading destination for all-day dining, artisan coffee and handcrafted cocktails with a focus on quality, seasonal ingredients and a welcoming atmosphere. 7 is where the community comes together to relax, connect and celebrate.
Life After the Rams is a Backpass production.